The hydraulic vise clamped down on my left hand with a sickening crunch of bone, and the sharp smell of machine oil suddenly made me want to vomit. Hey everyone, before I tell you how a single, desperate text message saved my life, let me know in the comments what city or country you're listening from right now. I always love seeing where you all are. My older brother Marcus stared down at me, his finger still resting on the control panel of the heavy milling machine. The massive metal fabrication plant was completely empty, the late-night silence broken only by the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights and the rapid, shallow sound of my own breathing. I had learned a long time ago how to stay quiet around Marcus. Quiet kept the peace. Quiet kept my job as the lead machinist secure. Quiet kept our family's pristine corporate legacy intact. By 26, pretending to be someone I wasn't had become second nature to me. I was Silas, the quiet, hard-working brother who stayed late to finish the industrial contracts. I smiled when the older foremen made their rough jokes on the factory floor. I nodded when Marcus told investors I just needed to find a nice girl to settle down with. I pretended everything was fine when I went back to my empty apartment with my hands covered in calluses and industrial grease. Nobody asked too many questions. People only saw the successful family business. That night started like every other late shift in the fabrication sector. I had just finished calibrating the main CNC machine. The air smelled like burnt metal and coolant. I thought Marcus had already left for the night. The front management offices were completely dark, and for one stupid second, I actually felt a wave of relief. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my heavy canvas overalls. I had been talking to a guy named Julian on a dating app. Nothing serious, just a few harmless messages. He had sent me a picture of his dog, and I was smiling at the screen. Then I heard Marcus's heavy work boots echoing on the concrete floor behind me. "What are you smiling at?" Marcus's voice was completely flat. I froze instantly. The phone felt like a brick in my hands. "Nothing," I said quickly, trying to slide it back into my pocket. "Give it to me." Marcus stepped into the harsh light of the work bay. He was wearing his expensive, tailored business suit, looking completely out of place on the dirty factory floor. His eyes were locked on my pocket. I stepped back, my work boots slipping slightly on some spilled coolant. "It is just work stuff, Marcus." Marcus moved faster than I expected. He grabbed me by the collar of my overalls and shoved me hard against the steel frame of the milling machine. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the concrete. Marcus snatched it up. He tapped the screen, and I watched his face contort with absolute disgust. "Julian? You were messaging some guy named Julian?" My pulse started hammering in my ears. "Marcus, please, it means nothing. It is a disease, Silas." Marcus threw the phone onto the floor, the screen cracking instantly. "You humiliate this family. You humiliate me. You think I am going to let you drag our company's name through the dirt with your sick perversions?" I tried to push away from the machine, but Marcus grabbed my left arm. He dragged me forward, his grip bruising my skin through the thick canvas. Before I could process what was happening, he slammed my left hand onto the open bed of the hydraulic vise. "No, stop!" I screamed, trying to pull back. Marcus hit the emergency manual override switch. The heavy steel jaws of the vise slammed shut. The pain was instant, blinding, and absolute. I heard the bones in my fingers and palm crack loudly over the hum of the machinery. I fell to my knees, screaming in pure agony, my hand trapped in the unforgiving steel. I could barely draw air into my lungs. The edges of my vision turned black. Marcus stood over me, his chest heaving. He looked at my trapped hand, then at my face, and for a second I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Look what you made me do," he whispered, stepping back. "You made me do this." He reached over and hit the release valve. The steel jaws opened, and I collapsed onto the concrete, pulling my ruined hand against my chest. It was already swelling, the fingers bent at impossible, horrifying angles. Every beat of my heart sent a shockwave of torture up my entire arm. Marcus paced the floor, running his hands through his slick back hair. You need to stay here. You need to think about what you are doing to this family. He grabbed me by the back of my overalls and dragged me across the floor toward the soundproof tool crib. I kicked and fought, but I was blinded by the pain. He shoved me inside the dark, heavy steel room. The heavy, reinforced door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked into place. I was trapped. I curled up on the cold metal floor, gasping for air, trying not to pass out. Outside, I could hear Marcus throwing tools, yelling at himself. He was losing control. I knew that mood. With shaking, greasy fingers from my right hand, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cracked phone. It was barely functioning. I swiped through my contacts, tears blurring my vision, trying to find my friend Noah. My right hand was trembling so violently I could barely hit the keys. He crushed my hand. I am locked in the tool crib, I typed. Please help me. I hit send. I waited in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of Marcus destroying the office outside. My phone buzzed. Who is this? The message read. I stared at the screen in pure horror. Wrong number. I typed frantically, ignoring the blood dripping from my left hand onto the screen. Wrong number. Please do not ignore this. My brother crushed my hand in a machine. He locked me in the tool crib. 3 dots appeared, then a message. What is your address? I hesitated. A sick, twisted part of me was still terrified of ruining the family name, but the throbbing agony in my hand and the sound of Marcus yelling outside broke through the conditioning. I sent the factory address. The reply came seconds later. Stay exactly where you are. I am coming. I read those words over and over until the screen timed out. I did not know who this was, but I clung to the promise. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The factory went dead silent. That was worse than the yelling. Then I heard a massive crash. It sounded like the front metal gates being kicked open. Hey! Marcus's voice echoed, muffled through the steel door. This is private property. Where is he? A deep, booming voice barked back. The voice was so loud and authoritative, it vibrated through the floorboards. I called the police, Marcus yelled. Good. Tell them I am already here, the stranger roared. Heavy, deliberate footsteps thundered across the factory floor. Then someone pounded on the heavy door of the tool crib. Step back from the door, the deep voice shouted. I pressed myself against the far wall. A second later, the tip of a massive steel halogen bar smashed through the gap between the door and the frame. With a sickening screech of tearing metal, the heavy deadbolt gave way and the door flew open. A giant of a man stood in the doorway. He was incredibly tall, broad-shouldered, and muscular, wearing heavy dark blue firefighter turnout gear with thick reflective stripes. He was breathing heavily, his short dark hair dusted with metal shavings from the door. His rugged face scanned the dark room and immediately locked onto me. He took off his heavy protective gloves and dropped to one knee beside me. Hey, he said, his voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. I am David, Heavy Rescue. Can you stand? I nodded, though the room was spinning. He looked at my mangled hand, and his jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might break. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind him, his face red with rage. This is a family matter. He is emotionally unstable. He hurt himself on the equipment. David stood up. He moved so fast, his massive frame blocking the entire doorway. You call this a family matter? David's voice was dangerously quiet. You crushed his hand in a vice. He provoked me, Marcus yelled, pointing a finger. He is sick. David stared at my brother, not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying promise. If you take one more step toward him, David said evenly, I will put you through that wall. The ambulance ride was a blur of bright lights and sharp pain. I remember David riding in the back with me, refusing to leave my side even when the paramedics asked him for space. At the hospital, after the doctors reset my bones and heavily casted my hand, a police officer came in to take a statement. Panic flooded my chest. I cannot press charges, I said quickly, my voice shaking. My family, the business, the investors. David stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed over his massive chest. He did not interrupt, but his eyes never left me. The officer frowned, warned me about domestic violence, and eventually left. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, feeling entirely broken. David walked over and handed me a cup of terrible hospital coffee. You know he is going to kill you next time, right? David asked softly. I stared at the paper cup. I have nowhere else to go. The business is everything. My apartment is owned by the company. David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You are coming with me. I looked up at him, shocked. Why would you do that for a complete stranger? David looked away for a moment, staring out the window into the dark city. Because nobody kicked the door down for my partner when he needed it. The drive to David's apartment was silent. I sat in the passenger seat of his old truck, my casted hand resting on my chest, waiting for him to realize he had made a mistake. But he just drove, one large hand easily steering the wheel. His apartment was located above a closed-down bakery. It was unexpectedly warm. It did not look like a sterile bachelor pad. There were thriving green plants everywhere, warm amber lamps, and old mechanical objects lining the shelves. It felt safe. The couch is yours, David said, tossing his heavy turnout jacket onto a chair. The bathroom is down the hall. Stop apologizing for bleeding on my floor, and if you need painkillers in the middle of the night, wake me up. I nodded, entirely overwhelmed. I did not sleep that night. The pain was too intense, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound of the hydraulic vise. At 4 a.m, I walked into the small kitchen area. David was awake, sitting at the table, systematically cleaning a piece of heavy climbing rigging. He looked up. Pain bad? Yeah, I whispered. He stood up, poured me a glass of water, and handed me my pills. He did not ask questions. He just sat back down and continued working. Over the next 2 weeks, an uncomfortable, terrifyingly normal routine developed. David worked intense 48-hour shifts at the firehouse. When he came home, he brought groceries, checked my bandages, and forced me to eat. I spent my days learning how to navigate the apartment with one hand. I felt useless. I was a machinist. My hands were my entire life. One afternoon, while David was asleep after a brutal shift, I found an antique mechanical coffee grinder on his shelf. It was completely jammed, the internal gears rusted and misaligned. Using my good right hand and a set of small screwdrivers I found in his drawer, I spent 3 hours painstakingly taking it apart, cleaning the gears, and resetting the tension springs. When David woke up, he walked into the kitchen and stopped dead. The grinder was reassembled and spinning flawlessly. You fixed it, he said, his voice full of quiet surprise. I shrugged awkwardly. I needed to feel useful. I am a metalworker. Was a metalworker. David walked over, his massive presence suddenly very close. You still are. He reached out and gently touched my good shoulder. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Silas. That night, the trauma finally caught up with me. I was trying to wash a heavy cast iron pan in the sink. It slipped from my one good hand and crashed onto the floor. The loud, metallic bang echoed exactly like the factory machinery. I completely froze. I dropped to the floor, my back against the cabinets, hyperventilating. I could not breathe. The walls were closing in. David rushed into the kitchen. He did not grab me. He immediately sat down on the floor right across from me, crossing his long legs. Hey, look at me, Silas. Look at me. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I cannot do this. I am broken. He broke me. David leaned forward. His voice was incredibly soft. No, he didn't. You are right here. You survived him. Talk to me. I pressed my good hand to my chest. I am terrified all the time, I yelled, the truth finally spilling out. I do not know how to exist without being afraid of my own shadow. David's expression shifted. The tough, hardened rescuer completely melted. He shifted closer, pulling his knees up. I get it, he whispered. My partner in the academy, he was kicked out by his family for being gay. I told him he could stay with me, but I hesitated. Just for one day, I hesitated. And he ended it that night. David's eyes were shining with unshed tears. I became heavy rescue because I could not save the one person who needed me. So do not tell me you are broken. You are still breathing. We sat on that kitchen floor for hours, and somewhere between the tears and the silence, the fear began to recede. I looked at David, really looked at him, the broad shoulders that carried so much guilt, the gentle hands that had pulled me from hell. I don't know how to be loved without earning it, I whispered. David slowly reached out and gently cupped my jaw. His thumb brushed away a tear. Let me show you, he said. He leaned in, and our lips met. It wasn't desperate. It was incredibly slow, patient, and warm. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 26 years, I didn't feel the need to hide. But reality could not stay outside forever. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was a formal summons to the annual Industrial Manufacturing Gala. Marcus was demanding I show up to sign away my shares of the family company, officially severing me from the business. I sat at the table, staring at the thick paper. I have to go, I told David. If I don't sign this, he will never let me go. David immediately crossed the room. I am going with you. I shook my head. No, there will be corporate security, investors, the press. I don't care if the president is there, David growled, grabbing his keys. He is not getting you alone in a room ever again. The night of the gala, the grand ballroom of the downtown hotel was filled with the city's wealthiest industrial elites. I wore a tailored suit that hid my caste perfectly. David walked closely beside me, wearing a sharp black suit that made his massive frame look even more intimidating. He never left my side. We spotted Marcus near the stage, holding a glass of expensive whiskey and laughing with the board of directors. The moment Marcus saw me, his smile vanished. He excused himself and marched straight toward us. You actually showed up, Marcus sneered, looking me up and down, and you brought the hired muscle. David stepped slightly in front of me. Step back, Marcus. This is a private corporate event, Marcus hissed, his face turning red. You don't belong here. Silas, get into the back office right now and sign the papers. You are an embarrassment. I felt the old familiar terror rising in my chest. My knees felt weak. I looked around at the wealthy investors staring at us. But then I felt David's hand rest firmly against the small of my back, a solid, unbreakable wall of support. No, I said loudly. The music in the ballroom seemed to dip. Marcus stopped. What did you say? I am not signing them in secret, I said, my voice growing stronger, and I am not hiding anymore. You crushed my hand in a hydraulic vice because I am gay. You tried to permanently cripple me to protect your image. Several people gasped. Conversations stopped entirely. Marcus looked around wildly, realizing people were listening. Shut your mouth, you psycho, Marcus yelled, reaching forward to grab my injured arm. Before his fingers could even brush my suit, David moved. He grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisted it sharply, and shoved him backward into a cocktail table. Glasses shattered everywhere. Do not touch him, David roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Security guards rushed forward, but several board members held their hands up, stopping them. The investors were staring at Marcus in absolute horror. You are destroying the family, Marcus screamed from the floor, his pristine suit covered in spilled drinks. No, I said, looking down at the man who had tormented me my entire life. I am saving myself. You destroyed the family. The police were called by one of the investors. Because of the public outburst and the witnesses to his violent attempt to grab me, the investigation into my crushed hand was reopened. Marcus was ousted from the company by the board the very next morning. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of a small, sunlit workshop on the edge of town. It wasn't a massive industrial plant. It was a custom metal fabrication shop. My shop. My cast was off, and though I had some permanent stiffness in my fingers, I could still work the lathe. I felt a pair of strong arms wrap securely around my waist from behind. David rested his chin on my shoulder, kissing my neck softly. Smells like machine oil and coffee, David murmured, holding me tight. I leaned back into his solid chest, watching the dust motes dance in the warm sunlight. It smells like home, I whispered. And that is how a desperate text to the wrong number gave me the right life. I want to know what you guys think about this. Was I right to confront Marcus at the gala, or should I have just walked away and started over in secret? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like so I can keep bringing you more stories like this one. Thank you for listening.